Jonathan, we're live, man.
All right.
How you doing? Are you excited for this?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm really excited. I love, I don't know, I work from home, so it's nice to just see faces during my day.
Well, soak it up, man, because this one's going to be with you for the next however long. Everyone, my name's Dave Shrein. I'm host of the Church Marketing Podcast, and this is Jonathan Malm, and he is the author of the recently released book, Unwelcome. So I've been looking forward to this all week, this Google Hangout, because, Jonathan, I went through the book, man, and I absolutely loved it. So I've been looking forward to talk with you and ask you a few more questions about it, just because, hey, I'm the one doing the interview, so I get access to you. But real quick, do you just want to tell people real briefly just who you are, and if they've never heard of you before, why anything you write should be something they should put inside their brain?
Yeah, well, I used to work at a church. I started as sort of a jack of all trades kind of guy, and as we grew, I got to specialize a little bit more. But my passion has always been the whole creative process. While I was working at the church, I started a website called churchstagedesignIdeas.com.
Which I love that website, by the way. I'm always sending stuff to people.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so that I started that, and it kind of grew beyond what I thought it could have grown to. I didn't realize there were so many churches doing that in the world and in the U.S. So that gave me a cool platform to start another thing called Sunday Magazine, which is a free online magazine with a lot of really cool voices in the church community, especially the creative realm. But yeah, so I've always had this real passion about growing churches, but making a welcoming church, one that people are really excited to be a part of. I kind of believe that a church will grow as long as we don't get in the way of it.
Yeah, totally.
Like God is passionate about growing His church, and sometimes we're the ones who keep it from growing. So that's kind of what this book is all about, is sort of the kind of getting ourselves out of the way to help, or to let God kind of do His thing.
That's awesome. So I have a really huge question, and I probably should save this for the end, but I'm going to ask it right off from the beginning. So it's been debated for decades. Every church that I've been at, there's just been massive disagreement, and I just need you to put a stake in the ground now. Is the church? Do we refer to it as a foyer or a foyer on behalf of guests? Is it a foyer or a foyer?
I am going to say lobby.
Very good.
Just destroy everyone.
There you go. Just get that new vernacular in there. So Unwelcome, essentially, it's a book about how we are intentionally or unintentionally making our church spaces welcoming or unwelcoming for guests. What are their first impressions when they walk in? How do they feel? What's the environment like? What are they coming from, and how do they respond when they show up on our campus? And so, like I said, I went through the book. I thought it was fantastic. But do you wanna tell me a little bit, like, why did you choose to write a book about what churches, you could come at it from two angles: what they do wrong or what they should do in order to do right by their guests? Like, why did you decide to write this book? Did you just see a need, or is it more personal story, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so I was visiting a church in the kind of northeast, I think, of the U.S. I was doing geography in my head, but and I walked through the doors, and it was a very interesting experience because I felt very turned off. Like I kind of wanted to bolt, and if I hadn't have been with some friends, I probably would have kind of snuck out or found a way to go away.
Yeah.
And I love church. Let me just start with that. Like, I really love church. Like, whenever I stopped working at my church, the first thing that I was excited about was finding a new church in the new city we were moving to. And we went to, tons of different types of churches, and I love them all. I really love any church that's effective. Yeah. So let me start with that. I'm not like walking into every church being like, "Oh, this is horrible. This is horrible." That's not who I am. I really.
You're not the guy sending Monday morning fan mail.
No. I mean, the church I'm involved in now is I think they do it phenomenally, and I love my pastor, and I'm excited. And I have a fun story about that I'll tell you later. But so I walked in, and I just counted things just on my hand, just things that I'm like, man, this is really causing me to not want to be here. So normally I take notes during the service, and I just started kind of listing the things that I saw. And I'm not going to send that to them because that's not that's not kosher. That's not cool, and it's not invited. Like they're not wanting me to send that to them. So,
Right,
but I was like,
absolutely.
man, yeah. And so I'm like, a lot of churches do this sort of stuff. I've been visiting a bunch of churches. These were things that we experienced at our church that we either needed to fix.
Yeah.
Now being on the outside, I get to see that, or things that we realized we needed to fix. So I just kind of wanted to use that as a launching point. These are some common things that people do wrong, or that they need to maybe watch out for. But then
Yeah.
use that as a chance to kind of tell people, okay, so here's the problem, but what's the excellence? Like, how can you do this excellently?
Yeah.
And that's really what I try to do, because it's really discouraging to have someone telling you everything you're doing wrong. Like, that's just criticism, right? That's not going
Yeah.
to help anyone. But like a critique actually gives you ways to improve, right? So use this as a critique of your systems, if you will.
That's awesome. It came out at a really interesting time because for the last, golly, man, 8 years I've been working full-time vocational in a church, and for like the last 10, 11 years I had been working in the church, on some capacity. So it wasn't full-time, but it was on some level. And this last Sunday was the first time my wife and I ever truly tried out a church. It's a bizarre feeling when you've worked in the church, and I know that's your story too, like you grow up in the church, but it's just this absolutely bizarre feeling for somebody who's been in the church to attend the church. Now, remove that aspect of it. I wasn't going into my experience, thinking, what are they going to be doing right? What are they doing wrong? Honestly, I was just excited to ride in the same car to a church building with my wife and
Yeah.
leave at the exact same time. Like, that was the biggest thrill ever. But I found myself immediately walking into the church wondering, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? And I'm acquainted with churches, and you talk about that in the book multiple times, how you were able to come to conclusions because, when you walked into a new facility, because of your time in the church. And that's the case with me, but I didn't even know what I was supposed to do. It turns out this church, and I love the church, by the way. We're going to go back. We absolutely had a blast, but they are what they call a family integrated church. And so I didn't realize it, but that meant that the children stayed with the adults for the first 30 minutes of the service. Well, I was trying to check them in. I didn't know where we were supposed to go. So it was a really interesting timing that this book came out and I got my copy that I could go through, because I was totally able to take myself out of that role of, working at a church and seeing what it is, some of the things that you're talking about there. And you mentioned there, you would take notes and you'd write them down, but you weren't like going to turn that in because that wasn't constructive. And I would imagine like this book, it could be written from a place of just these are my gripes that I've been saving from all the different church, but it really didn't come across that way. As I was reading it, I really felt like, man, this guy has a heart for the church, and this guy wants to see the church succeed. And so were you intentional about that? Were you intentional about making sure that people saw your heart come through, or is that just kind of how it happened? Or, it's a tough subject to talk about, so how did that come about?
No, yeah. I mean, it's a really big thing in my heart, the American church. I actually grew up as a missionary kid in Guatemala, so I went to the churches in the village that had
Yeah.
one speaker, and they knew one song that they sang for 20 minutes, and
Yeah.
the guitarist had one string. It was just I mean, and you see that, and you see that people are really
Yeah.
engaging with God and have a genuine relationship with God, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of people see that, and they say, oh, the American church is so consumeristic, if that's a word. They're so
It is now.
consumer driven. Yeah, they're so consumer driven. They're so whiny. All they care about is the air conditioning, and they want entertainment or whatever.
Yeah,
Which
sure.
it's really easy to see that, but it's a different culture, and we have to be aware that people have certain expectations when they go into a business, when they go into a building. So I really believe that this is something that'd be easy to bash on the church on, and a lot of people bash on the church. But that's not going to provide anyone help. Whenever you love the church, is when you can provide real help. So yeah, I mean, I didn't want this to come across as negative or discouraging. There's just not enough. There's no room for that. Like, the world is discouraging enough as it is.
Yeah. That's great. And I should mention real quick, if you're watching out there right now, if you're chiming in, welcome. Really glad to have you joining Jonathan and I for the Unwelcome Hangout. So that's fine. Welcome to the Unwelcome Hangout. But if you want to interact with us, our Twitter handles are on our individual screens, so you can feel free to tweet us up. We've both got our tweet deck or whatever open, and then if you want to use the hashtag #UnwelcomeBook, we'll see that coming through. So if there's a question that you have for Jonathan, something about the book, if you've already gotten your copy and you've read it and you like to chime in, feel free to do that. But use our Twitter handle or send a tweet out with #UnwelcomeBook, and we would welcome those tweets to come our way. So something else that I recognized about the book, and I was really curious about this when I first opened it up. There's a lot of quote unquote chapters. Like it's just like really, really, really long in chapter, but the book isn't super long in overall pages. And as I started going through it, I realized that you had created a format, and it almost feels like the book is meant to be taken in sections or bite-sized portions. You can certainly read it through, but for people who haven't seen it yet, it's broken down into 5 major sections, and I wrote them down here. First impressions, worship, programming, communication, and big picture. And so just talk a little bit about, like, what was your intent? Like, how do you foresee people picking up this book and interacting with the chapters and the book as a whole?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there are definitely things in each chapter that a church can learn from. But often, and I realize this working at a church is, my pastor would read an article or read something in a book, and he would say, "Oh, this is something we've been talking about, like this chapter." So he would, either copy that or just rip it out of the magazine and just give it to me. And so it kind of gives you that opportunity to say, "Oh, we were just actually asking about that, or we were just dealing with this question." So it really is just kind of as a tool. It's meant to be a tool to, you can give it to your staff, but then just say, "Hey, really focus on chapter 30," or you're a part of the worship, so really focus on the worship portion. Yeah, and I read so many books that about a third of the way through, I kind of get the point. Like I'm good. Like I got what I wanted from the book, and I can put it away. So I don't really want to make a book like that. Like I could probably write 60 to 100,000 words on something, but I think you get the point after 27, which is I think what we landed on, 27,000. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know that I was reading it. So that was your intent. I had no idea, and I was reading through it. And one of my friends who's a pastor, he's always asking, shouldn't worship leaders have their eyes open when they're up on stage leading worship? Because doesn't it just look weird when they're like, kind of look like they're off in their own little world? And so he's always saying something like that. So I sent him, I copied a little bit out of the Apple book, and I sent it over, and he goes, "Man, this is what I've been talking about." I said, "You got to get the book, because there's a whole section on there that it hits for worship." Now, are there any particular sections that were like super personal to you that everybody's got like nails on a chalkboard type thing, but were there any sections that is like, this is my nails on the chalkboard thing? If I had to put one thing in here, it's going to be this or these 2 things or whatever.
I mean, I think every single one of them I'm pretty passionate about, but there is one story of a time when my wife and I snuck out of a church after the worship because the experience stressed us out so much. And the beginning part of this was that, we got there a little bit late because we were new to Dallas. We were experiencing traffic. We didn't really know where the church was. So we got there maybe like 2 or 3 minutes late, like not even a big deal. But and it was a midweek service. And they had just whole sections of the church roped off, which I understand because it was a midweek service, so a smaller attendance. They were expecting that, but like it was almost full. So we approached 2 seats that were on an end of an aisle, and we got there, and it said reserved for ushers. And so then we went around to another side, got there, reserved for ushers. Like every single seat that would have been convenient for us without having to crawl through people was completely reserved. And so that just started, that started the experience where we're like, oh my gosh, we came to this for like encouragement, to the service for encouragement, and we're just stressed out. There were multiple other things that contributed to that, but yeah, so that's one of those, reserved seats or not showing people where to sit, things like that are things that can really, they might not scare a guest away, but they start you down a path of making it really uncomfortable for the guest where they're not able to receive what's going on.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I'm monitoring Twitter here, and Emily, hey Emily, hope you're doing well. Emily Carlton sent in a tweet, and she said, Jonathan, how do you give this book to a church that needs to read it without sounding preachy? Do you just send it to them without a return address? So I love you, Emily, and that's exactly why I love you. You're great. But that's a great question, Jonathan. Like, it almost seems like you're trying to, it's like giving somebody who needs to get in shape 30 days to, physical fitness book for Christmas is like hint, hint. So, what type of conversations do you envision popping up when, handing this book to someone? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard, when you give someone an article that's very much geared toward them. I would encourage giving them the whole book and maybe point out something that they do well in the book, and then to say, hey, and also maybe this other stuff would be good for you too. You always want to encourage people as much as possible, and I think Dale Carnegie says this, but what you encourage in people, they'll go toward. So as you show people, hey, you do this really well, they're going to start putting more value on that.
Yeah.
And then the other stuff can kind of come along if they read it, if they get encouraged by it. So hopefully they'll find it useful. The good stuff that they're reading, that they can actually go through the stuff that's a bit harder to swallow.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I really like about it too, is that it is like we talked about, like it was just so easy to pinpoint something. And so I was wondering, you get done finished reading a book, and a lot of us, I mean, admittedly, we'll put it on our bookshelf somewhere so that people can see, I've read this book and this is all of the knowledge that is now contained in my brain, so ask me questions, right? And you don't really ever pick it up ever again unless you become a pastor, and then all of a sudden you're able to just like crazy pull out all these book references that you've read. But for people like me, like, it's hard for me to read one book and then much less reuse it. And so the fact that you can say that you give it to them and maybe point out a chapter here or there that they're doing well, I think that's super valuable, because a lot of books, you just sit there and you're like, oh, let me find that point, and you kind of have to read into the context and then explain what you think they're doing well and say, okay, that was it. Whereas this one, you could just say, hey, read the section on worship leaders. I forgot what you called it, but it was something about when worship leaders realized on stage that they were leading people, that they don't have the same freedom that they would if they were in the congregation. So I made a couple notes, a couple things that I thought stood out to me as I was reading through it. This one I've already told like 3 or 4 people about this, but like you said, if you must lock doors at your church, use appropriate signage or place a greeter nearby to keep people from using that door. And I thought that was great, just really straightforward, practical. Are there any more like really low-hanging fruit things that you think churches, that you see churches doing well, or think that they could step into, that it's just an easy win like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's full of things like that. Some of them, do require a little bit more involvement. But yeah, I mean, let me kind of go through and see what the easy, quick hits would be on that. I would probably say parking. Again, not having reserved parking is the same one. I talk about, imagine going up to a company, like let's go to Starbucks or something, and you have a whole spot reserved for the CEO of Starbucks.
Yeah.
And what would you think about the CEO, right? Like, you'd be like, this guy is kind of full of himself, like, to get the best premier spot at Starbucks. Like, I mean, I guess I could see that, but that's kind of weird. And I think a lot of churches do that with their, parking spot, their pastor parking or
Yeah.
their staff parking. And those are often the premier spots, which I understand that you're trying to honor the pastor, but it sends a message. Imagine if you turned that into, pregnant mothers or mothers with small children parking. That sends
Absolutely.
a completely different message. And that's really, we're really trying to show our congregations that we love them. So any time that you can show them love, you're good, without being creepy, obviously. And that's one of the things. Don't get too physical with your greeting. That's another one that can get you in trouble.
You that example about the parking car. When people read the book, they'll see that you actually go on to raise the level of honor. Another thing, what if you had, like somebody were to come up and valet park for the pastor, or park the car for the pastor, and say, "Look, pastor, like we want to honor you, especially if you got a big parking lot, right? Like
And go
we want you to
wash
be
it
able to
too.
get in."
Like,
What's that?
go wash the car too.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. You said take it to the next level and go wash the car. I thought that was fantastic because that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? Like that's the value that the parking spot communicates is honoring the pastor. That's the value behind it. But the way that we communicate that value can totally change shape or form. And I think a lot of times we need examples, and we need quite honestly, like publications like this to give us permission to kind of break the mold and give us permission to do things in a new way. So our friend Kevin D. Hendricks, as it shows up on Twitter, he just asks a really good question. And the second that you sent it in, Kevin, I was like, I'm all over this. Jonathan, what do you think about gifts for visitors? And if you think that it's a good idea, what winds up working best?
Yeah, I think gifts for visitors is phenomenal. It can get kind of gimmicky. One of the worst ideas I had at my church when I was on staff was during, whenever gas prices started going up. I thought it would be so clever and so funny to tell people, to make an ad campaign that says, "The sub at church gives you gas." And we would give people gas cards. I thought that was so clever, so hilarious, so awesome. And I realized, first of all, that's gimmicky. I've heard it said, what you draw people with is what you're going to need to do to keep them. So if you're drawing them with gimmicks, you need to keep them with gimmicks. And I don't think you want to set your church up to do that. There are simple things. A lot of churches, what they'll do is they'll give a gift in return for information. Like, hey, if you give us your guest card, we just want to give you a gift. What that does is it gives them a way to say, okay, I want to be this involved. I'm willing to give you something, and it's just a way to appreciate the fact that they're willing to give you their information. It's not a bribe. If you're doing it as a bribe, that's bad. But if you're doing it, hey, we just really appreciate you entrusting us with your information, because that's a scary thing. Am I going to give you my email address and be put on 10 email lists? Information is a very closely guarded thing. So gifts are great. It can get also very very self-promotive, which is not necessarily bad, but if you're giving a shirt that says I go to so-and-so church and they just started coming to the church, that might be a bit presumptuous on your part. So give them a good gift. At my church, I go to a church of 300 people, and speaking of which, I wanted to say this. My church of 300, it used to be like 200 when I started going to it last year. It's a smaller church, but they do so many of these things so well. It's easy to think these things are for mega churches, but any church can be really welcoming, and I've seen that so well at this church here in San Antonio. So they give a Starbucks gift card, just saying, hey, we want to invest back in you to thank you for entrusting us with your information.
That's cool. What are some really unique gifts that you've seen churches give to first-time visitors? What are some of the more unique and maybe useful gifts that you've witnessed, or that you know of or have heard of, or something like that?
Yeah, there's always, frankly, coffee is always a great one. A mug, or I really think probably the Starbucks gift card is one of the best, because that's just so useful, and it's again very not self-promoting, which I love that. That's what I think, just bragging on my church here. My pastor does such a great job at not trying to be all about his church and about the church. So, during the altar call, he'll say, hey, we're not asking you to join a church. We're asking you to join a family here. If you don't ever come back to this church, that's fine. But, so it's like painting this vision of, we're not just trying to get you. I think that's so often what we do is kind of this bait and switch, like, we learn from marketing, we gotta always remind them to be all about our church, but that can get shallow really fast. So anything that you can do that really just genuinely shows love with no strings attached is a great gift, I'd say.
I love that. And I think the value that you're talking about there too is just being intentional about it and actually thinking through what it is that you're giving people and the message that it communicates and the message that it sends. That's great. So, church marketing sucks, and the Center for Church Communication, obviously, we have a lot of communication people. And if you're just joining us, we're talking with Jonathan Malm about his book, Unwelcome, that just got released this week. If you want to hit us up with a question, use the hashtag Unwelcome Book, and then our Twitter handles are also on the screen. But you have an entire section in the book dedicated to communication, and it's not an overwhelming amount of chapters, so I'm just going to read them real quick because I think people who are watching would be interested to see, what's actually in there. And so you've got one where you talk about the overstuffed bulletin. I think we all can relate to that. The out-of-dated online info. I'm totally all over that one. That's the first thing that I go to when I'm checking out a church. The wrong location, the website photos, all over that too. The forgotten social media account, the unwanted volunteer, the biblically illiterate guest, and the long-winded pastor. All of those things are really, you put underneath the category of communication. And I want to talk about just one that I get a lot of people asking me about, and it's really related to the bulletin. The question that they give me is, where should I put stuff, and how should I decide where to advertise what? But a lot of that hinges on the bulletin. So just talk a little bit about the section on the overstuffed bulletin. What are some of the things that you see and observe, and what are your thoughts on that? What should churches look to do in terms of being welcoming towards their guests using their bulletin?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a little bit just about the idea of, especially if you're dealing with inserts, it can be super frustrating for a guest who's trying to, carry their child, get their coffee, and so they already have no hands-free, and now they're given this bulletin that is, as soon as they grab it, paper's everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, you want to make it very friendly, very user-friendly, I guess would be the word. But another thing is, it's just, so often the bulletin and sometimes our stage announcements can just become the dumping ground for every bit of information we want to give our church. And it's cool because you have a lot of stuff going on, right? Like it can feel exciting, like look at how much we have going on. But one of the best things I've seen, best examples that I've seen of kind of what I want to say is, if you've ever been to In-N-Out Burger in California, there's now some in Dallas, they're all around, but I love In-N-Out because you go there and there's basically 4 things on the menu, right? There's a burger, fries, shake, drink, I guess, and then there's maybe double burger, so 5 things. Like that's pretty much it, right? You can get cheese and bacon, but it's not a lot of overwhelming things. And sometimes we can get so like, oh, we have to have this on the menu, we have to have this on the menu, everyone's looking for this. But what if we just chose, the 4 or 5 things we did really well and advertised those? Like, then what you can do is you can guarantee that people are going to get something they like, because this is going to be our best. This is going to be the really good stuff. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with doing, having 5,000 ministries, but usually those ministries don't apply to everyone. If you're doing a senior citizens board game night, why don't you just reach out to the senior citizens? You can pretty much find out who those people are, and there's a good chance they're already a tightly knit group anyways, so like you probably don't even need to use the bulletin. They already are able to communicate with each other, right?
Absolutely.
So a lot of just finding ways you just to put your very best stuff out there, and choosing stuff that will reach all of your people or the majority of your people. If that, I kind of went all around there, but
no, you hit on something that was really important, and I'm actually consulting with a church right now and kind of walking them through some of this communication stuff. And I think, and if anybody is watching out there and you can relate to this, I mean, feel free to let me know that we're not alone. But like, I think a lot of times we overestimate the number of people who will be impacted by our particular events. Now, maybe I'm preaching to the choir because there's church communicators and church creatives who are going to be tuning in and watching us because this is the Center for Church Communication here. But a lot of times we overestimate the people who are going to be impacted by our events. And so rather than asking the question, such as, are there any reports that I can pull out of my church database management system that allow me to send a particular email to just one group of people versus putting an insert in the bulletin and announcing it to everybody, right? Like if I can look at past signups for a food drive event, could I just email those people, run a report, email those people, rather than having an impact on that first time visitor, putting an insert in, she's trying to hold her kid, she's trying to get coffee, and then she drops it on the ground, and now she feels obligated to pick it up, right? Like, isn't there a better way to do it? And I love what you said there about the senior citizens. Like, think about the demographic, because if there's a group of seniors in your church, they're probably tight-knit, and there's a good chance they're all going to be in the same room at the same time together, and that's who the board game night is for. So become selective in where you choose to promote stuff. So I think in the midst of hitting all the things you did, you really nailed down a huge value. And I was going to read the simple menu quote, because I highlighted that in the book, because I was just reading that. I was like, yes, amen, amen. I agree with that. So we had another question come through with the hashtag unwelcome book tag, and says, Jonathan, what about things that you can't fix that people find unwelcoming? Go above and beyond in areas that you can. So like if you can't fix certain things, so like maybe it's a communicator who really doesn't have the freedom to limit the amount of inserts that are getting put in the bulletin, or maybe it is a pastor who's not related to the welcoming committee team, and they insist on charging donations for coffee, and they can't fix that. How would you advise people go about dealing with things that they can't fix, and kind of doing what they can, I guess? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think these are really cool opportunities to learn to lead from beneath or from aside.
Okay.
I dealt with this a lot dealing with the pastor. I had a creative idea, or he had a creative idea that I just really didn't think was going to land, right?
Yeah.
And it can get so frustrating because they might be non-receptive to what you have to say. But it's really a chance to learn that leadership skill of leading people who you might not even be responsible for.
Yeah.
So much of that comes, first of all, you start with humility. People aren't going to listen to your ideas until you listen to their ideas, right?
Yeah.
That's just like a basic leadership principle. So if you want someone to listen to you, start respecting your pastor, start respecting your greeting team. Focus on the things they do well and appreciate that. Say, hey, I had never thought of the way you guys did this, but I realized that's a great way to do it. I would have never thought of that. And by respecting what they have done, what they have accomplished, you start with a bank of chips. There's kind of this illustration of you have this kind of investment in them that you can then draw on, right? So start investing in them first of all, and then just cast a vision for it, paint a vision for it. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the heart behind all of this? So often we focus on the visible things, what we see. Oh, this church did this, and we think that's enough to sway someone, but that's not. What if you start with, hey, this church made me feel so welcomed, and this is what they did. So focus on the heart behind it. People, I think, are a lot more willing to change than we think they are. I think whenever we show your heart, whenever we show like, okay, this is my heart, just whenever you get that personal interaction, you can do it. But yeah, I mean, when they said go above and beyond in areas you can, yeah, that's definitely one way to do it. Probably in your church, you might still do 10 of these things that are no-nos, right? But you can still be welcoming. Obviously ideal, you get all 50, but no one actually lives in the ideal world, right? There's the right way to do things, and there's the way everyone actually does them. So
that's good. That's good. Okay, so I want to run an idea by you, and I think I know what I think about it now, and I think I know what the answer truly is. But I want to run it by you, and I want to hear what you have to say, because the church that I was most recently working at, they were telling a story about how when a new family would come to the church and fill out a visitor card, they would get the address, and then a team of volunteers would jump in the car and go deliver a box of cookies or something like that to their house. So when they came home, there was a box of cookies. So now I think where you're at geographically impacts whether or not that's a good idea, because when we first heard it, we were like, wow, that's above and beyond. Like, that's great. But then when we stopped and thought about it, we're like, that's kind of creepy. Like, you've been at my house and I don't know who you are. So, what do you think about that idea, and how do you kind of draw the line between creepy and cool? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you really have a heart to do that, I would advise you to just put a simple checkbox that says, "I would love you to stop by my house." If you're unsure, I would also, if you don't have that option, I would try to gauge it based on their age group, based on their occupation, based on if they have young children. An elderly couple that's recently retired, they might be much more willing for you to stop by their house, especially if you're in a small town. If you're in a large city and it's a 28-year-old upwardly mobile with a young child, and they're just scrambling to spend time together, probably not your best idea. But that's a great way to do it. It's just that little, I would love you to stop by. I would love you to give me a call. That lets people show how much they want you to engage with them, instead of you just presuming on how much they want.
So what do you think about follow-up calls? What should follow-up calls look like? What do you think churches should be asking when it comes to follow-up calls, and extending that welcoming spirit beyond their first visit?
I think it should really be just kind of a, hey, we just really enjoyed having you here. Again, people are so used to this idea of there's no such thing as a free lunch. Meaning, okay, they're calling me, it means they must want something, or they're giving me something, it means they must want something, and so people can immediately kind of push on, stiff arm you away. Even if I'm interested in something, if I had a great experience at a car company and they're still calling me, and I'm like, oh great, what are they asking for me? And they're like, oh, we just wanted to see how you're doing. I'm like, sure, you just wanted to see how I'm doing. And then at the end of the call, they say, oh, by the way, can you rate us a 5 on your customer survey you'll get? I'm like, well, there it was.
There it was, right there.
Yeah, so I mean, one of those things is legitimately ask, how are you doing? Or legitimately ask, hey, is there anything that we could do to help you and make you feel more welcome to either our town or to our church? We'd love to. And just leave it there. As much as possible, serve. People get excited whenever they're not being asked for something.
Yeah. I do. That really does bug me. I get that all the time when I'm leaving a place. Can you please go and rate us a number 5? Because I'm probably not going to rate you at all at that point, because if it's not a number 5, I don't want to, there's this personal connection that I've had, so I'm not going to give you any feedback, and what good does that do anybody, right? I've never liked that. So just this idea of genuinely wanting to be kind to somebody and genuinely wanting to be useful and helpful and do whatever you can to really bring value to their lives and to their visit, and let them know that there really is no strings attached. I love that. Oh man, I just had something on my brain and I was excited to ask you about it. Does that ever happen to you?
All the time. I would say one thing, and just the idea that it's so easy to see all of this stuff as kind of a consumer culture idea, where we're just trying to make the customer happy, and that's really not that's not really not what it is. I think there could be churches that are doing every single one of these things right, but if they're not doing it from a position of love and a position of caring for people who God sends their way, it starts feeling very very lifeless and very businessy. And so that's one of the, I think that's one of the big chapters in the book, is the idea of just do this out of a place of love. This is not about consumer culture. This is about loving the people that God sends your way, which is a huge important thing for churches to always remember. I think every week you should probably evaluate, was I doing this from a place of love, or from a place of just trying to do good marketing or good communication.
Yeah. Okay. It came back to me, so I've got it. It's back, and I'm not going to lose it. For those of you who are just tuning in, we're talking about Jonathan's new book, Unwelcome. Great book about how churches can be more intentional about the messages that they send and communicating to visitors through the things that they do, right? And so if you want to hit us up with a question, just use the hashtag UnwelcomeBook on Twitter, and I'll see that come through, and I'll ask Jonathan, whatever we get coming through here. And we talked a little bit earlier about, how this book could have very easily been an indictment, but of what churches do, but rather we've turned the corner here, and it's a it's a critique, and it's also an encouragement of here's how you can, be better in certain areas. So with that said, what do you think it looks like for somebody to pick up this book right away? So somebody who's going to pick it up, they probably have bought into the concept a little bit. They're probably thinking, I think that this is something we can improve on. And then they open it up, and there's, however, what'd you say, there were 50 different? Yeah, 50 different chapters. And they're looking at it, and they're just like, I throw in the towel. There's just so much that we need to improve. Like, how does it first look for somebody to pick up? Because I know, as looking through it, there was probably 20 things that it was like, the last church that I was at, it was like, I loved being there, but I was responsible for 20 things that we were doing incorrectly, or not incorrectly, but not in a welcoming manner, if that makes sense. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you feel like your church is probably in a bad state, I would probably not read the book from cover to cover. I would flip the pages and see something that maybe I would start with something that you think that you're doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are doing it well, either that'll confirm it, or it'll show you one way that you can do it even a little bit better. It'll just give you, maybe you're at a 90% and you can take it up to a 95%, and that's great. It's always good to start with things that you can do, small, measurable, incremental changes, instead of feeling overwhelmed. And then move on to the next thing. And as you start getting it under control, then you can read the whole thing and realize, okay, we're not in such a bad place. Because the goal is not to discourage people, right? You never want that to be the case. Because again, God reaches people, and the church is going to move forward regardless of how welcoming we are or not. Our goal is just to just be loving and be a tool, the best tool God can use for reaching people. But if you're a pastor, I would highly recommend reading it, and then I would just make a calendar to say, hey, this week I want to talk about this one. The next week I want to talk about this one. I wouldn't try to approach the team and say, hey, let's change 20 things all at once, because a lot of teams, especially if you're dealing with volunteers, which a lot of smaller churches do, 100% volunteers, it's going to take a while. You don't turn a ship around in 2 seconds. It takes a little bit of time. It takes a slow turn. So just small adjustments over time, and you'll start seeing real results.
That's good. Okay, so in the book you give an example. Let's say that we're opening the book, and the one that we're going to start with, there's lots of things we could do, but the one that we're going to start with is the first impressions and the greeter and giving people space. In the book, you have an example of, you showed up to a church, and there was just a very sweet older lady greeting people, and I think you said she extended her hand but then brought you in for a hug, and you're like, okay, the handshake's fine, the hug's a little bit, but I've gone to churches, I understand, and she's a sweet old woman. But then, God bless her, she put her cheek upon your cheek, and you're just like, okay, whoa, like that's just that I know everything, but that's just too much for me. So that's a tough conversation to have. Have you had to have those types of conversations when you've been working in ministry with people? How do you step into that? Because really they're coming from a great place, but you're about to do something that could squash that enthusiasm and that genuine love that they have for people. How do you approach something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about people that are overly loving is they're usually overly loving because they love people, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of giving them a vision, hey, we love that you love people, and because you love people, can you help us be more effective at that? Which would mean, some people that's just kind of intimidating for them. We know that you love fully, and that you don't have probably a lot of baggage that might keep you from being able to be physically connecting with people.
Mm-hmm.
So because we did actually have to have that conversation with lady, and it was funny because we had stories of people who loved being greeted by that lady because she felt like their grandmother, right?
Absolutely.
And there will always be anecdotal evidence that you don't need to change some of these things, but you'll never hear about all the people that were scared away from it.
Yes.
So that's the thing, is they might come back to you, oh, well, so-and-so loves that, and you just have to say, well, I know, but unfortunately we don't hear from all the people who are pushed away from that. And that might be one of those things where you just have to give them this book and to say, hey, this is something I just like us to try. This expert, you can always throw the expert card, right? This person knows what he's talking about. And just say, hey, this expert says that we probably shouldn't do this. And, we know that this is not your style, but we're trying to build a team that's bigger than any single one of us, which means we're all going to have to make sacrifices.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes me think. That makes me think about a show. Have you ever seen Kitchen Nightmares with Gordon Ramsay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he goes in. Anybody's familiar with the show? I mean, you know what happens. He goes in and he basically starts calling out in a much more critical way than you know than we would ever advise. I mean, we're providing this stuff because we want to help, but Ramsey goes in there and I mean he's got one day, so he's just tearing down walls, right? And often what people say, well, people like that menu dish, or people like when we do this, or people like when I get up and sing Janet Jackson karaoke. People like that sort of thing, and it's just like, no, they don't. Well, nobody ever complains. Yeah, but they're not coming back. Like they're going to let you know what they think in the restaurant setting with their wallet and with their feet, right? Like that's how they tell you. They're not going to say, "Hey, owner, we really didn't enjoy you singing karaoke in front of us for 45 minutes, you know, while we were trying to enjoy our dinner." They just won't come back. And so, you know, Ramsey does a good job of, you know, kind of bringing most of them down to reality, but it's so true. Like no one's ever going to go up to someone and be like, "Hey, that person over there, they was all up in my space, you know, like get them off." They're just going to avoid that door or not come back. So so it's pretty instructive. It's a pretty good show though, isn't it? I mean, to give people how to treat people.
Well, and it's so funny. There's a church, not a church, there's a restaurant here in town. I love their menu, and I visited once, and I was actually scared off, but the food was so good I came back. But what happened is they had this fairly large Italian guy standing outside the door. It was at this kind of like open-air mall, shopping mall area. He was standing outside the door with menus to try to welcome people in and to open the door for them. But the impression that gave was that he was a bouncer keeping people away. Like it was intimidating. And so I actually went up to the door and I'm like, I actually kind of said, "Am I allowed to come in?" And he's like, "Oh, yes, come on in." And for him, that was a way of honoring, of being respectful, and of being a nice, you know, very high class establishment. But it scared a lot of people away, and they didn't have a lot of business. And then, you know, a few weeks ago, I went back and I noticed they had 2 female hostesses standing inside the door, and all of a sudden, I mean, really, the restaurant is full. Like every time I go by, the restaurant is just jam-packed. But previously, when there was a guy outside, it wasn't. And there's these little tweaks that you think you have the best intentions, but they really send the wrong message.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, so you said it makes it look like a bouncer. The way you described it, I was thinking like maybe it was like a gang or like a mafia or something like that, like protecting the family business or whatnot.
Yeah, but, like what's going on in there?
Yeah, seriously. Why does this guy have to be standing outside in this mall area? Like, what are they trying to do? Cool, man. So, I mean, we're getting close to the end here. I was just looking through. I made a lot of notes. One that I really liked that actually is a lot harder to convince people or train people to do than it seems. But it's when it comes to projecting lyrics on the screen. Like you talk about, the note that I took, it says, make sure the song lyrics are up on the screen a couple seconds before you have to sing them. And that's totally true. Like the second that I stepped out of being a music leader or a worship leader at the church, I stopped learning all the lyrics to the song. And so I'm sitting there waiting for the lyrics to pop up. I know they're not the ones that are in my head, so I saw that and I just make a note of that. I really appreciated that. Another thing that you talk about, the reserved parking, and you just put it in the perspective of a guest might be looking at a pastor or a staff to reserve parking, is they have the power to reserve that spot for special customers, or they can reserve that spot for themselves. And so or special visitors, I love that. I mean, it's just packed with all sorts of really helpful, quite honestly, tweetable things. I mean, all of the notes that I took, they're less than 140 characters. When I'm talking about the grandma, you said, be extremely friendly, be extremely inviting, but give your guests their space when they need it. In an attempt to make everything look nice and neat, we often color coordinate our signs to blend in with the decor. But when they blend in, we may as well camouflage them in a duck blind. And I was at a restaurant just before we hopped on here. I was at a restaurant looking around for the restroom sign, thinking, is it going to be blend in? And fortunately, they only had one neon sign in the entire joint, and it was a big red restroom sign. I was like, this restaurant's got it down. Like, they know what they're doing. But it's just all sorts of really helpful things that even if you can only do one thing at a time, they're in such small bites that it really is something that can be accomplished one thing at a time. So, and I know that that was your intent. I know that that's what you wanted to do. The last question that I have for you, and if anybody else, we've got a few more minutes here. If you have a question and you're watching, send it in using on Twitter using the hashtag #UnwelcomeBook. And if we get it in time, we'll try to get it answered here. But the last question that I have, Jonathan, is, you know, this book comes out right now, and often there's a lot of excitement surrounding the release of a book. And people can go to unwelcomebook.com right now and get it in whatever flavor they want, like online or printed, however they want. But a year from now, you know, that buzz kind of dies down, right? The buzz of a new book isn't there like it is the first week or the first 6 weeks. What would be your hope for this book? How would you envision this book, your book, living on? I mean, you put a lot of effort into it. It's good stuff. How do you envision it existing in a church setting a year after the excitement and the hubbub has kind of passed?
Yeah, I fully believe that everyone should have a bookshelf that has, you know, the books that they've read, but they should have a special shelf dedicated to the rereads. You know, there are a few books every year that I think everyone should reread. Like if you've read How to Win Friends and Influence People, that's one of those that every year you should revisit that.
Yeah.
And my goal is, you know, if you're working at a church, you should have your books as a church that you reread or you revisit, or you at least go back and review the highlighted parts every year and just see how you're doing. My goal would be that this would be on that shelf.
Yeah.
And that it would be a part of, you know, many other books. But yeah, that's kind of my goal for it. You know, I'd like to see that in a year, people revisiting this and maybe retweeting it, retweeting that thing that really stood out to them. And because I think the natural thing for any church is to drift away from, you know, things that you're doing well. That's just the natural thing. I mean, we do that in our spiritual lives. We do that in churches. You just drift away because you forget why you're doing what you're doing. You know, if you forget why you're doing baptisms, well, then you're basically just, you know, splashing water on people, right? Like there's no life in that. So you need to remember why you're doing these things. And my hope is that this book will remind people why to do what they do.
That's good. So I said that would be my last question, but I lied because I have one more I just thought of. So with the church that you're attending, or maybe a church that you're working with, do you have any of these 50 things that you're currently walking through right now that you're trying to learn how to do better?
Yeah, it's funny. That's one of the stories I wanted to tell. Is my pastor and his wife, they gave us a ride back from Houston, and they gave me a ride from Houston because I was doing something over there. And my pastor's wife said, "So what do we need to do? Pick one thing that we need to fix from your book." And I'm like, that's scary. That's too intimidating. And really, one of the things that we're working through, and we kind of talked about this, was just the idea of seating. The cool thing is we're running out of seating. Like we have 2 services. Right. They're both very full. And, you know, so one of the things we're trying to do is figure out a way to get people seated, to encourage our people to, you know, seat guests, seat congregants, and get them, you know, kind of in a place where you can get as much use of the seating as possible. That's something we're working on, and it's, you know, it's easier said than done. It's a struggle all around, but yeah, and I don't really have a responsibility in that area, so it's kind of weird. But you know, I love this church. They're doing such a phenomenal job, like way above and beyond where they should be at their size. Great people. So I really believe that any church can do these things and do it well.
Fantastic, man. Well, the book is Unwelcome, and it's on sale now, just released this week through the Center for Church Communication. We've been talking with Jonathan Malm, and it's just been a great conversation. If you're just tuning in or you only caught a portion of it, the replay will be available at churchmarketingsucks.com. It'll be featured there for the next couple days, I think, and then you can go to unwelcomebook.com, like I said, to pick up the book in any flavor that you prefer. So I like reading it in the Kindle, or I have the iBook version because they have a scrolling feature. I don't have to flip pages. I can just keep scrolling. So I really enjoy that format, but they've got it there for Kindle. They've got it there where you can order the book. So, Jonathan, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it. I love the book. I'm really grateful that you actually put it together because It's something that I've been, like I said, like I've been in vocational ministry for a long time, and I have never seen a book that is this intentional about this one specific thing that, quite honestly, is huge, not only for our culture, but also in the kingdom of God. I mean, Jesus was the ultimate when it came to hospitality and treating people well and respecting those who he was around and making them feel at ease, and then knowing when to push the boundaries a little bit too. So he's a great example, and I appreciate you taking the time to write it and help us honestly become more like Christ in such an important area. So thanks, man.
Yeah, definitely. So glad to be doing
Absolutely. Oh, and if anybody wants to keep up with Jonathan, just follow him on Twitter at Jonathan Malm, and he'll get back to you. He will. And if I see a lingering tweet out there, I'll be like, Jonathan, get on this, man. You got to be welcoming to people.
That's good.
Awesome, man. We'll see you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it again.
All right, thanks, Dave.
Bye.
Bye.